So on the theme of power, there's something that's really important here, which is this question of sex, right? Sex and sexuality and sexual energy inside of the container of being a leader, being a facilitator, being in some, whatever it is, some position of power that you hold, that is given to you via a role and not via necessarily status or personal power. So, and in this context, you're either the leader of a community, you're a facilitator, or you're an event leader, right? So, again, we've talked about how our power doesn't come from how we feel, it comes from the power that other people give us. And so our job is to know it, to own it, right? To take responsibility for it. And inside of that, we have to be always expanding our awareness of our own power and our impact. Now, one of the possible impacts of having role power and meeting someone inside that context is that I would say in many ways, people lose the ability to give true consent, right? So there's a lot of difficult things that can happen inside of a power dynamic if you introduce sexuality, right? So let's say I'm a leader and you meet me in the context of being a leader, right? Suddenly our relationship is set. There is a power dynamic and I have a role, right? That role power, you can think of it like a scarf around my neck. Now I can take that off and change how I'm showing up, but on some level, I'm always going to be wearing that scarf in the eyes of that other person. Now, being aware of the potency of our role power is vital to keeping us on the straight and narrow with regards to so many of the problems that we see in the mainstream culture today. And I'll talk about the effect of power on the brain later. But essentially, there's something that happens with the brain with the coming of with power, which is that we actually have an increased sex drive, it's just part of what happens. And so having this kind of information can be super helpful. So I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. I know a woman. She's personally powerful, and she also teaches she teaches something in the realm of consent, boundaries. And she's in her 30s. She had a younger friend. Her friend was probably in her early 20s, was in college. This woman ended up going and doing a workshop of some kind at the university and met the best friend of her good friend who was at the university. And one of the things that happened is that she had some attraction for this young woman, and she was aware of her role and some of its power. And there was some attraction there, and she actually brought it in a gentle, ethical way. You know, she checked in, and things kind of progressed. And essentially, she landed in this place of basically inviting this woman to have some kind of sexual contact, but really wanted to honor this person's boundaries really deeply. She was by the book. She was like, okay, I'm going to sit here. You can do whatever you want. Like, you get to initiate. Don't do anything you don't feel comfortable with. Don't do anything you don't want to do. So this other younger woman, proceeded, and they had some kind of sexual encounter. The other woman making choices for herself every step along the way. The older woman making no moves, no choices, right? Only being responsive to what was offered. Now, what she didn't know was that woman looked up to her and felt like she didn't have a choice and couldn't say no. And what happened was that she actually views that woman as her perpetrator now. And she felt sexually violated. Even though she did all of these things right, the thing that she was missing was that she wasn't aware enough of the impact of her role power over this other woman. I'll give you another example. Again, another person who is in the realm of, works in the realm of boundaries and sexuality and consent. A friend of mine knows this person and speaks very, very highly of them. One of the most ethically minded, conscious people they know. And he's quite successful, quite well known. And he was entering into a project, and there was a woman that was invited onto the project, and she was very excited, and she did some kind of, I think it was some type of sex work, domination, something along those lines. And he actually went to her at one point and wanted to like check her out or experience her services. And she said yes, and they had some kind of encounter, again on her terms. But she, in that moment, she was like, okay, I don't want to do this. If I say no, will I lose access to the marketing and visibility and all these things that I'm really valuing about having this connection with this person? And so she transgressed her own boundaries and ended up working in that capacity with this man, even though it didn't feel good for her at all. And she actually ended up going to a magazine and reporting her experience, and there was a scandal, and he handled it quite well. He had an accountability team and did a lot of things. At least that's what I've heard. But again, here it was like the thing that was missing, and maybe you see this differently, but for me, the thing that it was missing was he wasn't aware enough of the power that he held in his role, right? So if we divorce ourselves from this idea of like, oh, like we're equal, everyone can make their own choice, we can get into a lot of trouble. It's easy and it's desirable for us to believe that we all are on an even playing field. But when it comes to this world of roles, right, boss, employer, facilitator, minister, there is a power dynamic. There is a party that has more responsibility and a party that has actually more vulnerability. So it's so important that we really understand and practice conscious awareness and continue to become more and more aware of the power that we hold and the impact that it can have in the way that people can feel disempowered in connection with us. And it may not be visible, right? So there's a way that we have to be vigilant, that we have to be continuing to be skilled, to be informed, right? To check in and also to follow the ethics and guidelines that you put in place in your community. So why is this, right? Part of it is that when people meet us in our role with role power, what happens is that they become in relationship with our role and not with us. And again, this is where sexual dynamics become really complicated, right? Because it's like, all right, they're not in relationship with me. I feel available and accessed or whatever, but the person that's maybe attracted to me or that I'm attracted to is in relationship with my role because that's what they're seeing. There's some of me in there, that is there too, but is completely colored by the fact that my role is here and present in the relationship. And so if I lose my awareness of this, again, that's when I can start to get into trouble.